The GOP looking to seize momentum after that big tax reform win. The White House is expected to release an infrastructure plan in January. President Trump is pushing a bipartisan fix for health care. Here with us is Independent Women's Forum Senior Fellow Patrice Onwuka, Tax Foundation President Scott Hodge, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, Brian Riedl. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming in. Scott, what are we first going to notice in terms of the effects on the economy of the tax plan just enacted?
The biggest changes will be coming on the corporate side, where the United States is going from having one of the worst, least competitive tax systems in the entire world to having one of the most competitive tax systems. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies starting to bring cash back from overseas. They're going to make a lot of investments here in the United States because they get full and immediate expensing of their capital investments. You're going to see a big rise, I think, in the amount of capital investments. That's going to lead to higher productivity and higher wages. So we're going to see a lot of big changes in the economy in 2018.
By the way, Scott, what do you say to people, the naysayers who say, look, they're only going to use this extra cash to buy back their stock and give out bigger dividends?
Well, if you have a 401k, that's pretty good. But I think we will see a real effect on capital investment, and that's going to be great for the economy overall.
All right, Patrice, let's talk about the individual side of this, because I understand that $40 a week, which is what most people are probably going to be getting, doesn't sound like a lot of money. On the other hand, I had dinner on Friday night with a single mother who works very hard to take care of her child, is special needs kid, so it costs extra money. $40 to her is an extra bag of groceries a week. That means a lot to her in particular, and I would imagine to millions of people all over the country.
It absolutely does. You know, I had a similar conversation just yesterday with defending the tax cuts and really explaining that, you know, for many Americans, it is difficult to come up with even $400 in case of an emergency. So whether it's $40 or an extra $100 a month, that is something that Americans can put aside for even for discretionary spending or for, you know, those things that pop up that are really difficult. And unfortunately, the media has done a great job of denigrating this tax bill and spreading misinformation and, frankly, lies about it. So when Americans start to see their paychecks increase, hopefully as early as February, I think that'll do a lot to dispel a lot of the lies.
Brian, you know, there was a lot of concern by deficit hawks, both the Republican and the Democratic Party, about the tax cuts, saying you have to find a way to pay for it. You have to pay for it. It's our money, so I don't think you have to find a way to pay for them taking less of our money. But on the other hand, the one thing that does concern me is when these deficit hawks start talking about infrastructure spending and saying, you know, that's the last thing we need right now is to spend billions more in infrastructure or for infrastructure when we didn't get much of a boost from the Obama stimulus. What do you say?
Well, I think that there's a smart way to do infrastructure, and that's public-private partnerships, state and local governments, including the private sector. Indiana's done innovative things. What we don't want to do is redo what they did with the stimulus, where you just take hundreds of billions of dollars, you pour it into projects that basically benefit donors and funders. You end up getting projects like Solyndra. We don't want this to be micromanaged out of Washington. Infrastructure should happen from the bottom up. It should be planned by local communities to see what they need rather than dictated by Congress based on donors. I think if you can do that and you can have some more private involvement, have it a little more grassroots, you can do this in a better way than top-down Washington.
Well, Scott, is there a way to use the tax system to incentivize companies to do that, to pay in a private sector way for infrastructure?
Well, there's certainly ways in which you could use, like the expensing provisions will allow a lot of companies to invest in capital investments. We could go a step further and allow them more expensing for, say, buildings and larger infrastructure projects. That was put off on the table because it was seen as too expensive. Now, we may actually have to look at funding those infrastructure projects by raising the gas tax. No one wants to talk. No one wants to talk about that. But if you want to pay directly for roads, you're going to have to raise the gas tax.
Patrice, that's something that would cut directly into the middle class.
It absolutely would. I think people will feel that very immediately. Now, we are looking at an economy that's strong and resilient. We're looking at low unemployment overall. So hopefully Americans would be able to absorb a little bit of a tax when they go to fill up at the pump. But, you know, they're getting a bigger paycheck. They're getting better paying opportunities because of a market that's like on fire. And they're seeing their 401ks and their retirement growing. So maybe it'll balance out.
Brian, there is the other fact. It's true. Most Americans don't own individual stock, but most Americans have some kind of pension plan, some kind of retirement plan, 401k, whatever it is. Do you think that they care about what happens with the stock market?
I think Americans care a lot what happens with the stock market. I know a lot of people who spend a lot of time, me included, looking at your 401k.
Well, you're kind of a numbers geek, though. I'm talking about folks who you know, are at the factory all day.
Of course people look at their 401ks. I think that that's a common thing, and it's been a very good few years for their 401ks, and I think this has made a lot of families a lot more savvy about making sure that we do things to keep their 401k doing well. We keep the economy moving. We make sure that businesses have the ability to invest capital and to do better, because when they do better, your 401k does better.
Scott, how high do you think this tax cut program is going to allow the market to rise?
I'm not sure about the stock market itself, but when we modeled the tax plan, we found that it would boost, at least in the short term, the economy from, say, 2% annual growth to 2.4 to 2.5% annual growth over the next 5 years. It will begin to taper off.
What happened to that 3% number that we heard from Donald Trump?
Well, it's going to take a little bit more. Like regulatory reform would be a big step in helping to unlock some of the pent-up business that are being frustrated by these regulations.